Let us look at the US threat and Russian dilemma for India. I would like to mention here that complexity of relationship between nations are almost impractical to compare in absolute terms. And therefore it's an effort to look at facts and figures and analyze these for a course best suited for India-US and India-Russia relationship. Let us see the strategic picture. Post-Trump, international relations are no more subtle, but are now bolder, and especially China, which played from shadows, is out in the open, and Xi is unafraid of calling names. India, on its part, looked leaning towards West, can no longer play a game of win-win, and is clearly not pro-West, which most had assumed given bonhomie of US-India relations of late, especially post-India-China conflict of 2020. So the strategic picture is very complex, fluid, and confusing. We started with the Trump era, got accentuated during COVID, and now is on tether during the Russian invasion of Ukraine. In the Indian context, China-India relationship and the conflict of 2020 is another dimension to the complexity. US on its part had been wanting to draw India on its side and had got an opportunity in 2020 during India-China standoff to show its solidarity with India. But this hypocritical stance is now exposed with India standing neutral in Russia-China conflict. And this is largely because of India's dependence on the missile, nuclear, and space know-how, which is largely Russia-centric. And therefore, in case of emergence of China, Russia combined, the world becomes very highly dangerous for the Indian defense. And add to this complexity, Pakistan was veering away from US and was leaning towards China, which would have made northern borders difficult to manage. So, on one hand, there was a dependence on US for strategic posturing, yet Russia, because it was in proximity, could have proved critical. Now, US is the biggest export market for India, but is also cornering India for the trade balance. Connected is the software industries, though at the moment it has got a limited overall impact. But now moving forward towards it may turn into a critical high-paying services sector growth, and it will be mostly dependent on the Western collaboration and client. West is also slowly replacing China with India as substitute for supply chain. Now that is one another factor which one has to take into consideration while we carry out a strategic analysis of the overall relationship of the country. Let us look at the political imperatives for the external affairs management for the ruling party at the moment. Now in the nation right-wing sentiments prevail. Core philosophy of anti-communism, anti-Islam is reaping rich dividends in vote consolidation. Foreign affairs need to enmesh with these core political requirements, showing ability to have an independent voice around core national interest. In India, political parties, unlike earlier, may now have differing perspective on foreign affairs. Needs a continuous narrative of Hindu nationalism for the ruling dispensation, which helped them come back to power. Exploiting the weak opposition, which is lacking coherent political philosophy. Now, it is in consonance with siding with strong right-wing world leaders. Biden doesn't seem to fit into this, though Trump did. Now, Kashmir is electoral plank for vote consolidation and need to be on a slow burner, with peaks at right moment. Economically weak and anti-US, Pakistan's ruling dispensation removed old problem of Pakistan's ability to raise the ante, which used to help US pull strings in South Asia. Though with going away of Imran now, it may come back. Unemployment and high cost of basic necessities is also becoming an issue in electoral politics in India, and privatization is critical for this growth and employment generation. US model, which had been largely been adopted by India for economic growth, is not proving all that successful. And on top of that, pressure tactics of US to bridge the trade deficit isn't liked in power circles, especially India importing US crude vis-a-vis, let us say, from sourcing ex Iran. Now, another issue is a large, poor electorate is being weaned away by the new entrants in local politics, and which needs to be stemmed by the ruling party. A narrative is being built to put them down as traitors, working with separatists outside India. Now, this works in vote banks politics. Indian diaspora's craving for identity in foreign land based on ancient Hindu culture helps present regime neutralize anti-India sentiments in the West and has largely worked to neutralize the anti-India voices within the diaspora itself. Neutralized pro-Muslim sentiments in Middle East on economic plank, especially UAE, whose economy is widely propped up by Indian flows, especially tourism. Now, praise of Indian stand by Pakistan PM on numerous occasions helps the ruling dispensation in India to take bolder decisions. Subsidizing fuel and LPG and catering for rural fertilizer demand is another politico economic necessity. Efficiency in input cost management is critical. So, overall, foreign affairs management, these factors also impact how foreign affairs are being managed. Let us see India's overall trade picture. In 2020, India was number 6 economy in the world in terms of the GDP. It was 18 in exports and 12th in total imports. It was 150th economy in terms of GDP per capita. The top imports of India are crude, gold, coal, diamonds, petroleum natural gas, palm oil, soybean oil, nitro fertilizers, and computers related equipment. It imports mostly from China, basically computer related equipment, USA, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq, which is the biggest oil supplier to India. The top exports of India are refined petroleum, mostly going to USA, medicines, diamonds, after processing, rice, jewelry, and it is exporting mostly to the US, China, UAE, Hong Kong, and Germany. In December 2021, the increase in India's year-by-year exports were explained primarily by an increase in exports to US, South Africa, and Australia. Now, Australia here is very critical, and the trade between India and Australia are likely to be in a high trajectory because Australia is very keen to replace China with India as its supply chain partner. They have signed an Indo-US Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement, which is likely to materialize in a full-fledged free trade agreement shortly. Even UK post-Brexit is keen to finalize a free trade agreement with India. Let us see the India-US relationship. USA is India's biggest trade partner, and in 2021 the volume was around 120 billion US dollars with large trade surplus with India. US is also a critical partner against the Chinese threat. India today is member of Quad comprising USA, Japan, Australia and India. However, this grouping seems to be in a testing water at the moment with limited interoperability of forces. How successful it will be during critical times, that only time will tell. One major issue is that USA has got big influence over the Pakistani defense forces, and they really make a difference. If you remember, during Kargil war, Pakistan was put on mat by USA and told to withdraw from Kargil Heights, which they did. Now, there is an influential Indian diaspora and US. However, their utility at the moment needs to be exploited by India in a bigger way to make sure that they turn into a soft power for India and US. And a lot of work has to be done in this direction. Now, India and US are supposed to be collaborating in shared priorities in vaccine diplomacy, resilient supply chains, critical and emerging technologies, STEM-based education, climate action. However, problem with India-US relationship is too much of choice and too little to show in critical technology. It always seems that US wants to sell, not share. And it seems a logical conclusion in its approach towards India. Is US a reliable partner? Is a big question mark in context of the subcontinent. In 2016, India was declared a major defense partner of US. However, today it seems that Modi and Biden have lukewarm relationships because of the widely differing view of the world politics. Threatening tone of US on various issues like S-400 import from Russia much before this Russia-Ukraine conflict, oil from Iran, and very recently a junior diplomat from USA threatening India on on Russia-Ukraine war issue doesn't go gel well in the overall perspective. Of course, both are democracies, but how relevant is this is very difficult to answer. One major difference between US and India, which is not in the forum, is the culturally they are diametrically opposite. India is worried about crumbling family values and breakup of earlier cohesive ethnic and social integration. And it is mostly due to the impact of Western led information and social media. Russia India relationship. India is the biggest arms importer from Russia, is dependent on critical space during critical times, and India is in a habit of creating these critical times far too often. Russia is also in proximity to India and has got influence in Afghanistan and CIS countries, which are critical to India's geopolitical outreach. At the moment, there is a minuscule trade, however, which has got potential to reach 30 billion by 2025. Russia is strategic partner for India in critical defense, nuclear, space, and missile technology, very important for a country like India, and nobody else helps. Now, out of the total imports, Russia only accounts for 1.6% of the total imports of India, and imports primarily being coal, petroleum, rough diamonds, seed oil, machinery, sea vessels. However, there is a potential of tapping Russian gas and oil or Russian backed Iranian gas and oil. And in fact, if it is tapped, it can be presumed that about we will have our oil and gas import will be reduced by about 15%, which will wipe out the complete subsidy bill of the government. And for a layman, this would also help government sell the petrol at pocket-friendly rates. However, proposed pipelines like IPI and TAPI are fraught with strategic implications, especially Pakistan's behavior in times of conflict. Rupee ruble trade has got pros and cons. If currencies are stable, very beneficial, and there is saving in the bills of the countries. Importantly, Russia also appeals to the hardliners in India, who see India as a top competitor in the world politics and therefore need a balanced, neutral approach. Russia is after Soviet times is also very is less intrusive and certainly non-influential in the internal politics of India, whereas West continues to hit an Indian independent voice on various economic and social issues. And this is especially against President regime. Now, it is supposedly a good equation between Putin and Modi, both on the right side of the spectrum, and historically, though less relevant now, but Russia has always stood by India, especially for on the issue of Kashmir, which is very critical in India's internal politics. Russia has also had during Soviet times in co-liberation 61-71 war with Pakistan, and Indian sentiments are with Russia.
Now, having seen the complexity of Russia, US, India, China relationship, let us analyze what's good for India. I have the benefit of listening to 2 plus 2 press conference and therefore a little wiser on how what way India is moving. The strategic picture is clear. US and China are in direct competition, confrontation. Russia, Ukraine, they look proxies for the ultimate showdown of this one-upmanship game. India, with big economy and reasonably big defense force, and its proximity to China, can be a deciding factor in this tug of war. We have to define India's interests. Let us define what comprises national strategy and national interest today. So I've just divided for simplicity. It's a very complex subject, but for simplicity, I've divided into four subjects or four subparts: long term political military alliance, long term socio economic alliance, short term economic interests and necessities, and short term defense necessities and preparedness. So let us quantify, where does India stand to gain? First thing first, are we in the inner circle of cooperation in long term political defense with anyone? The answer is temptingly yes, and Russia, but largely not true. It's a plain no. With US, we are supposed to be in a critical defense partnership since 2016. But I don't see much of a progress has been made in this direction. Russia has no option but to move in China camp since its relationship with West is now seems beyond repair. French and Germans are trying to negate, but it looks very difficult for this relationship to continue in the manner which was continuing earlier. Secondly, where does India look to increase its per capita GDP? With trade and future technical relationship which is critical for its growth and happiness of people. A vital socio-economic need is important for India. And where does India look in this direction? Though China, Russia, India relationship can clinch it, but Sino-India conflict, especially of 2020, has set it back by years. It looks difficult to repair. The national sentiment, especially right-wing thought, doesn't allow a reconciliation. Let us call it 1-0 in favor of US, with the first point being decided at 0-0. Third is critical short-term defense preparedness of India. As of today, it is totally dependent on Russia. US, by forming AUKUS and leaving both Japan and India out, hasn't done well to instill confidence in this regard. Undoubtedly, it makes 1-1. Now let us see which country can influence the internal politics and economy of India. Clearly, US, and it has got Pakistan, whom it can go to help. Now with Imran Khan gone, US may again haunt India, like it did in 80s and 90s. No, but not at that level. Though a negative and threat-filled factor, but it still makes it 2-1 in favor of US. I would like to mention here that today US needs India more than ever, and this factor may not raise its head for the time being. Short term political dependence on helping India an issue like Kashmir can be counted upon Russia to help. With scores tied up at 2-2, what does India do? I'll stick my neck out and say that India should now start acting as a good forward rather than a winger back. Important but limited opportunities to score goal. And if it moves into the front line of activity at the international level, we should be able to do better. I must congratulate the present government, which has brought India a great deal to the overall picture of the world strategy. Now, problem with both US and India is that they are humongous democracies and their movement towards cooperation is very slow, very, very slow for the modern times. Since nuclear deal in 2005, they have hardly made any substantial progress towards generating confidence in each other. They get tied up with too many small details and start working on them rather than getting to the big picture and pushing critical cooperation in the forefront. They have far too many unnecessary checks and balances and red tapeism in their systems. This needs to go. And it doesn't allow dynamism and real time progress for modern times. On other hand, Russia and China, they don't have these kind of issues. And they are immediate action countries which India can gain a lot. However, Since both are democracies, they have to learn to work faster and create the conditions in which they can cooperate. Today, India is where it is in its technological base for defense industry, space, nuclear, missile technology is because of Russia and not because of US. So US has lost a big way for not cooperating or not trying to build a relationship with India in terms of technical inputs to the country. To end, I would again stick my neck out and say West need India to keep Russia within its influence and not lose it to China, which then will be worrying not only for US but scary for the world and its economy.